In the Great Lakes region, Burundi goes to the polls on Wednesday. This amidst simmering political violence and fears the country is sitting on a COVID-19 time bomb. This week, President Pierre Nkurunziza's government expelled the country representative for the WHO, despite mounting fears that Burundi's election rallies could help spread the new coronavirus. The nation of 11 million has reported close to 30 cases so far, but has only carried out about 520 tests in total.
President Pierre Nkurunziza is stepping down, but will remain president until August. And a new constitution has given him sweeping powers to declare a state of emergency if the results are disputed. He anointed Evariste Ndayishimiye, a retired army general, as his successor for the ruling CNDD-FDD party. 6 other candidates are running, including opposition leader Agathon Rwasa, deputy chairman of the National Assembly and leader of the CNL party. This election, though, is marked by its share of problems. Burundi says most election observers would have to undergo a 14-day quarantine, which means this election might proceed without any. Journalists there face the constant threat of arrest or attack, and many have fled. Some civil society organizations have been closed. Last year, the government shut down the United Nations Human Rights Office after repeated criticism that the youth wing of the ruling party and the security services were torturing, gang raping and murdering political opponents. Rights groups say those attacks have increased in the run-up to Wednesday's presidential, legislative and municipal elections. Both Ndayishimiye and Rwasa were senior commanders in predominantly Hutu militias during the country's decade-long civil war that killed around 300,000 people. Nkurunziza came to power in 2005 as part of a peace deal. The country was plunged into violence again in 2015 after Nkurunziza sought a third term in office, a move his opponents said violated the constitution and terms of the 2005 peace deal. Nearly 500,000 people fled and the economy never recovered. The violent protests eventually subsided, but low-level political violence continues.
For more on this story, we joined via Skype by African Affairs analyst Nixon Katembo. Nixon, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Good evening, Simpiwe, and good evening to your viewers.
What should we expect in this week's coming elections in Burundi?
I think what we expect is an elections that has been prepared by the Burundian themselves, which has been waited for a long time. One garnering for the departure of Pierre Nkurunziza, whom we will finally see going after anointing his own predecessor, Evariste Ndayishimiye, you earlier mentioned in your report, but also contested elections where former comrades in the arms of struggle, more especially in the Hutu group, the likes of Agathon Rwasa and many others, likes of Sindimo, coming to the party in these elections. Well, we have about 6 major candidates, both of which have been part of the struggle that have happened in that country, especially armed struggle.
The fact that the country of 11 million, they're going to the polls wherein there is a great deal of human-to-human interaction and social distancing is not normally practiced under those circumstances. And the fact that the president has expelled the World Health Organization country representative, the timing of it all is suspect, isn't it?
You see, Burundi finds itself at a crossroad. On the other hand, you have the COVID-19 pandemic, and on the other hand, you have an elections that seeks to actually cement the democratic gain that that country is trying to have. And one needs to understand that if you look at the history of Burundi, the question has been about, democratization, the leaders giving power power and allowing that democratic process to happen. Now, when the time comes to have that, you have a pandemic. So the leadership have to choose between having the elections or postponing the elections like many other countries have done, or having the elections and being at risk of saying, now, we have said that Nkurunziza don't want to go out of power. You see how they have postponed the elections. So these are the critical issues that one need to consider when talking about the current elections in Burundi. But nevertheless, there have been a precedent. Mali held an elections and it all went well. Guinea, prior to that, had also held an elections, and we hope that Burundi and the Burundian in general will take it upon themselves to make sure that these elections pass in a peaceful way.
Why should we concern ourselves with the Burundi crisis? I mean, why does it matter? We know that the stability in that country is in jeopardy with dangerous regional consequences. And is there a likelihood of a regional spillover?
Well, Burundi and its nature of the composition, if you look at society itself, there has been those tensions that are within the country, but also that it takes a regional aspect to it. For instance, you would recall that in 2015, the Burundian faced a coup, which eventually was, accused on some government in the region, where you have the likes of Hussein Rajab, who is one of the leaders who orchestrated the coup d'etat, including the General Nyombare ran to Rwanda. So those are the key issues that one need to look at while going to these elections. And just recently, we've had cases of violence coming up in Burundi, grenade attacks, and the more recent one, just last week, the confrontation between the Burundian army and the Rwandan army on Lake Rueru. Those are key issues. Then just across in the DRC, you see rebel groups trying to enter into Burundi, the likes of FNL, the likes of, Red Tabara, which are based in Eastern DRC. These are key issues that, make the situation in Burundi far more at crossroad with what is happening in the region. So one have to consider all this in a sense to think about really the importance of having these elections, having a peaceful transfer of power from Pierre Nkurunziza to the next president who is going to be elected.
Now, is there any likelihood that this could perhaps compromise the Arusha peace agreement that was signed in August 2000 over a 4-year period to help bring about peace in that country, which saw over 300,000 people being killed?
Well, if you look at the Arusha agreement, there is a number of key issues that were not really looked at. One of them was a transitional government that was set up after the Arusha Accord. The second one is the transitional constitutional framework, actually under which Pierre Nkurunziza served, and eventually seeking a term on a popular mandate, because the first constitutional mandate was just an arrangement within the National Assembly, who elected the president within the National Assembly. But after changing the constitution and seeking a popular mandate, it's when these issues of him wanting a third term arise. So these are some of the key issues going forward in these elections. And the one, if you evoke the Arusha Accord, you would recall that actually CNDD-FDD of Pierre Nkurunziza, which were a major player, including Agathon Rwasa at the time, which were still in fighting, were not part of the Arusha Accord per se, but they were persuaded to accept the Arusha Accord, and in which actually, if you look at demographic composition of Burundi, where 14% who are majorly Tutsis, and the rest is a majorly Hutu, and the 1% of Twa populations. division of the National Assembly seats, actually the Constitution said that 40% will go for the Tutsi minorities and then the rest. And if you look at the terms of democratic process, we really, this call to question, what does democracy means to a country like Burundi? Hence, you see tensions coming over and over afterwards, even after the signing the Arusha Accord.
Well, Nkurunziza oversaw heightened tensions and escalation of violence and the muzzling of political opposition in the country and, of course, a declining economy. So now that he's stepping down, post-Nkurunziza, is there a likelihood of a restoration of peace in Burundi?
There will be a restoration of peace if Burundians work together. But if you see those who are going into these elections are the people who have been participants in the conflict in Burundi. You take, for instance, the SNL candidate Agathon Rwasa. He was the leader of FNL, Palipe Hutu in the conflict. Burundi, the likes of General Evariste Ndayishimiye, he fought hand in hand with Pierre Nkurunziza. So it's very early much to tell what is going to happen, owing to also the confrontation between Burundi and Rwanda, which have closed the border between the two countries for almost 2 years, and there has been skirmishes between the two countries. And as I earlier mentioned, you have the issues of rebels who are still in Eastern DRC in the likes of the province of South Kivu. So those are key issues that is there a political willingness for these political players within Burundi to come together and put the nation first? And those who are actually fighting and those who are forming rebel group, including regional players who are supporting either side, because you recall that during the failed coup d'etat against Pierre Nkurunziza was the time in Tanzania, but Tanzania had to make sure that he returned to Burundi even when the coup had taken place. So you have those regional dynamics as well that are going to come into play going forward after these elections.
So is it correct then to suggest that, these elections will see an escalation of the Hutu and the Tutsi tensions and an ethnic war brewing in that country?
Well, I think it's too much early to tell whether there will be an escalation. As far as I know, is that indeed there are political ruling elite on both sides, both in the Hutu majority and the Tutsi minority, who have controlled much of the army for a number of years, since actually the time of Jean-Pierre Buyoya, including the successive armed conflict that have happened in Burundi. Even when we speak now, they still have much of the sway the national army. So whether they are going to take the interests of the nation first rather than their ethnic affiliation, it remains to be seen going forward.
All right, Nixon, thank you so much for your reflections. That was African Affairs analyst Nixon Katembo speaking to us live via Skype. And we'll leave it there for now. We'll be back at the top of the hour.